first one obviously is a Buddhist one. Our suffering is the seed, wisdom is the sprout, enlightenment is the grain. And another one, which comes from St. John of the Cross. I entered into unknowing, yet when I saw myself there, without knowing where I was, I understood great things. So I wasn't actually expecting so many people to be here at all because the psychedelics conference is going on downstairs. So I'm figuring that anyone that's actually here has a particular interest in trauma and has probably or possibly experienced trauma themselves. So the first thing we're going to do is something that I learned in the how to treat trauma, which is to give ourselves what they call a butterfly hug, where we cross our arms and we give ourselves a little pat on the collarbones. We can give ourselves a little, we can go the whole hog, give ourselves a good hug and just, hi me, hello, hello me. Yeah, we don't do that sort of thing often enough. So the second thing, I want to give a disclaimer as well. First of all, with this, my talk is called From Tragic to Magic. I don't want to give the impression at all that you can wave a magic wand and make trauma vanish, because you can't. The other thing is I don't want to idealise trauma either, because anyone who's experienced that themselves will know that sometimes, survival is all you can actually do without thinking about enlightenment or any of these other things. So what I'm going to do is quickly outline my own experience of trauma and the ideas that accompanied me along the way, which I found useful. And that mainly involves Jacques Lacan, psychoanalyst, and the Neo-Platonist philosophers such as Plotinus. Okay, so my own trauma, the nexus of it really couldn't be given a more appropriate symbol or image than that of the tower in the tarot, and this collapsing tower with lightning. So it was 1998. I had just finished my philosophy degree and I was travelling around Asia. And I'd been travelling for about 8 or 9 months at this stage. And at every point, usually when I came into another country, oh, by the way, sorry, I'm Northern Irish, so when I say tar, that's tower. For everyone else, or par, it's power. So, and if anyone doesn't understand me, please interrupt at any time. So I would phone home every time I arrived in a new country, just to say, I'm here, I'm okay. And one day I phoned home, and my grandmother answered the phone, and she was clearly distraught and said, "There's been an accident, you have to come home." So there was some sort of festival going on at the time in India. I can't even remember, was it Diwali or something? But anyway, I was in Darjeeling and it was just chaos outside and nothing was open. And it was before you could order flights online. But someone managed to get hold of the embassy and they organised flights for me. And I travelled back to Belfast. And at the airport, I was met by my dad's best friend and taken into a little room. And I was told that there had been a very bad storm and that part of the building that my parents had been in had collapsed on top of them. So my dad was dead and my mum was in intensive care and they didn't know if she would survive or not. So as an only child, I ended up having to make, there's so many decisions to make around funerals, everything from, the coffin, the choice of the paper for the hymn sheets or whatever. And I had to choose my dad's clothes. And when I brought them to the undertaker, they said to me, no, we won't be needing the trousers because the bottom half of his body was so badly crushed. So it was terrible. But it didn't end there because, as anyone who's experienced trauma knows, trauma tends to compound trauma. So my mother recovered, and as time went on, I was dealing with an increasingly difficult situation with her. So just to give one or two examples, when I left the father of my children, I took the train to Belfast, and my mother arrived with her new boyfriend dressed in my dad's clothes. So she took my children out shopping one day and phoned me to tell me that my daughter had been kidnapped. It wasn't true. She started phoning people behind my back, friends, people I was working with, and telling them not to tell me that she called, but that her medical friend had diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. And my mum doesn't even have a medical friend, And I mean, it's so bizarre, it would be quite funny, except that it's, there was so much of it. I found out that she had stolen my identity and had been using my identity for over 30 years. I remember actually she taught me how to write my signature when I was about 10. And it turned out that she'd actually already been using my signature at that stage. So she was teaching me how to write her version of my signature. And this went on, I found out she'd forged my signature right into the past decade. So I was living with trauma for quite some time. And I tried to reach out to people, to family and friends of the family, to say, look, this is happening. It's I'm on my own. I had children as well at that stage, and nobody wanted to hear it. And this is very often the way with trauma. I mean, not only is it difficult to speak our trauma, but when we do speak it, very often we find that we're speaking into a void. And I think part of the reason for that, and I'm going to look at Jacques Lacan, it'll all get more sort of academic now in a minute. I think part of the reason for that is that trauma threatens the structure of society in a very profound way. There's something about trauma that radically undermines the social fabric. So we tend to live in a world where people don't want to see it. Right, where am I in my little hotel notebook? Let me see. Okay, so because what I'm talking about here as well is this zone where language fails, where we can't express what we have to say. So as well as the fact that it's hard to even say the facts of the narrative, it's even more difficult to put into words the experience of that. I mean, how do we speak our own experience of trauma? What do we say? I'm sad, I'm raging, I'm bitter, I want revenge, these things, these words, really all words, fail. So in a way, language becomes meaningless in the face of trauma. So, So, of course, we have the arts, thank goodness. And in a way, really, because, unless you have a field that you can scream into, the arts is our socially acceptable outlet for expressing these things. You cannot stand in the middle of the street and scream the pain of your soul, or you'll very quickly be taken away. Society doesn't like us expressing these things. So this void, this place where language fails, this place of trauma, of this experience that can't be spoken, Jacques Lacan calls the real. So during this period, I studied psychoanalysis in Dublin, and then I went on to do the MA in Western Esotericism in Exeter. So that's where these ideas that sort of accompanied me on my path came from, and I found them interesting. So Lacan is difficult, really difficult. So I had a whole thing written out about Lacan, and I read it to my daughter, and she said, "No way." She said, "If you say trauma and the real one more time, I'm going to rip my eyes out." So I'll just give you a quick synopsis. Lacan's psychical realm is there are three realms. Okay, there's the real, there's the imaginary, and there's the symbolic. So the real is this void. It's for Lacan, it is trauma, but it is the place where there is no language, there's no meaning, it's alien. There's nothing that fits our previous experience in any way. And this is so terrifying. And for Lacan, this is ever present. It's so terrifying that we use another realm, the imaginary, where we create an internal fantasy. So we create a fantasy about the self, for example, that we have a self, because in the real, even self-identity disappears. So we create this internal fantasy, and then the symbolic realm is the shared social realm, and it is the world of encounters with other people, and it is the law, it is symbols, and it is language. So between this imaginary and symbolic, we create for ourselves an ego. So we create it in fantasy, we express it in the symbolic. So we express it through language, through the language we use. We express it through symbols, the clothes that we wear, maybe if we're in the 80s, the car that we drive, maybe that's still the case for some people. But so there's this construct, but all the time lurking for Lacan, whether people have actually experienced a personal trauma or not, trauma is always there because there are rips in this fabric, this sort of coherent narrative we've created of one ego interacting with other egos. And these rips are at the limits of what is expressible. And I think probably everyone is aware of that you meet someone, you can only share so much of yourself with someone. Communication, we can never fully express ourselves to someone else. And this inability is, for Lacan, is trauma. So where am I now? Yes, the comfort blanket of understanding one another or being able to communicate with another person, of existing, is ripped off, and we're left in this sort of seething, frozen void. And this is the space that I find really interesting. I mean, this is the interesting space, really, isn't it? So for Lacan, he was obviously a psychoanalyst, and so he was focused on healing people. And for him, this involves a paradox, because on the one hand, we have to create a narrative to reintegrate in this symbolic realm, or in the realm of other people, to be able to sort of be normal again, interact. We have to be able to say our narrative. So, for example, I said my narrative of my own experience. However, Lacan says that part of the healing process is that we also have to be able to understand that we've been to this place that is completely beyond understanding. We've been to this place that is completely other, that there isn't really even anything to be said about it. We can't say anything about it in his theory. So somehow we come back, we reintegrate. But I think everyone who's experienced trauma will know this. You come back, but you're never going to be the same again, and there's an awareness then of the limits of language, the limits of our interactions with other people. Well, if all, are you all right? Oh, are you putting your hand up?
No, I'm saying just 5 minutes.
Oh, we've got 5 minutes left?
Yes,
We've only got 5 minutes left. Oh, better hurry up. Right, okay. So that might mean we get to bypass Plotinus. Anyway, so Plotinus is really nice. I mean, he also talks about, the mystical philosophers also talk about this realm beyond language, which is the one, and it's this wonderful source of mysticism, this place where this seed of enlightenment grows from. But coming from Lacan, I really like the myth of Persephone, and I think it really sums this up very well. We have Persephone, who's a young nature goddess, out in the field in spring, collecting flowers in the sunshine, and she's abducted by her uncle, who's ganged up with her father to allow this to happen, and she's whisked down into the underworld, and kept there and raped and left there in amongst the shades and all the horror that is in this unspeakable realm. And she's there and she's there and she's there. And eventually she gets to come out because, of course, her mother, Demeter, has said there'd be no more spring, unless my daughter gets out. So she gets out. What's she going to say? What's she going to say to her fellow spring nymphs about her experience? It's impossible. And even if she had the words for that, they simply wouldn't be able to understand. There's no overlap for communication. However, in a way, it doesn't need to be said, because Persephone emerges from the underworld and she embodies it. She embodies the suffering, the pain, the darkness, and she comes out utterly transformed. In fact, when she went in, she wasn't Persephone, she was Cora. And that all vanishes, the whole idea of ego and self vanishes, and she comes out the other side as Persephone, queen of the shades, queen of the badass underworld. And I think, so just to cut this short now, because I've probably finished. So I think all of us, perhaps, who've survived trauma, and of course, a lot of people don't. But those of us who've survived, whether we're, whether we're sort of limping out or sort of, battered or broken in some way from it, I think still the fact that we actually managed to walk out of it, we're all Persephone. I think every one of us who's come through trauma, I think we can take the title of being king or queen of the underworld. Thank you.